I noticed it before anyone spoke. Not the number 18 million looked exactly the way it should. Clean, confident, celebrated. What felt wrong was the line beneath it. Project Lead Corey Hale, Director of Strategic Growth. My name has completely disappeared. I had spent 14 months architecting that revenue. I designed the pricing model, negotiated the risk thresholds, rewrote the compliance language that made the deal survivable under audit, yet the room stayed politely quiet, as if names changed themselves overnight. No one explained. No one looked at me. Gordon Hale, the CEO, walked in late, unbothered, wearing the relaxed smile of someone who had never had to defend a decision with facts. He pointed at the slide, then at his son. "Ren built the engine," he said, generously, "but Corey deserves a chance to drive." The sentence landed heavier than it sounded. Just like that, my role dissolved into something abstract. I would remain available if needed. Advisory, flexible, present. But no longer accountable. No one said the word replaced. They didn't need to. One quick note before we continue. This story contains fictionalized details and uses AI-supported storytelling to deepen the lesson and emotional experience. If this format doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. Please take a break, get some rest, and look after your health. Corey nodded, already settling into the chair I used to occupy during partner calls. The meeting moved forward. Timelines, growth projections, applause disguised as strategy. No one mentioned the conditions behind the revenue. No one mentioned that the 18 million depended on named operational oversight, quarterly controls, and a single compliance sign-off that couldn't be transferred by optimism. I stayed quiet. I always did. What they missed or chose not to notice was that my name hadn't vanished everywhere. It no longer appeared on the slide, but it still lived where the money actually became real. In the legal appendix, in the conditions, in the part no one reads aloud, right before consequences begin. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, pause and take a sip of water. These stories are here to help you recognize unfair dynamics before they cost you. Share where you're listening from, and subscribe to stay with stories that turn quiet moments into hard-earned insight. What happens next changes who's really in control. I didn't need a spreadsheet to remember how the 18 million came together. I remembered the first negotiation call that ran past midnight. The silence before a counteroffer. The moment I restructured pricing to absorb risk without triggering audit flags. I rewrote clauses no one wanted to read, locked exposure where it could not drift, and built reporting rules strict enough to survive scrutiny. The revenue wasn't luck. It was engineered. That was why the handoff felt obscene in its simplicity. Corey Hale spoke in meetings the way people do when they've skimmed the summary but skipped the substance. He loved vision decks, momentum, phrases like, "move fast and trust the process." He rarely opened attachments. He never asked why controls existed. Gordon praised this as fresh energy, as if experience were something needing replacement. My access changed quietly. I stopped appearing on core threads and started receiving polite FYI messages hours later. Decisions were already made by the time they reached me. The tone shifted too. Less precision, more enthusiasm, less caution, more applause. It was the kind of transition that pretends nothing has changed while ensuring everything has. Then the question arrived from our strategic partner. Simple and perfectly timed. Who's accountable now? It wasn't hostile. It was procedural. The kind of question that separates confidence from structure. Before I could respond. Corey did. He replied with certainty, copied leadership, and signed his name as Project Authority. No hesitation, no clarification, no awareness of what that claim carried. I watched the email land and felt disbelief burn off. That was the moment my frustration cooled into something sharper. If accountability could be claimed so casually, consequences would follow just as easily. I closed my laptop, aware that $18 million had just changed meaning for everyone involved permanently. I understood the problem the moment Corey claimed authority. The $18 million was never a trophy you handed over with applause. It was conditional revenue, bound tightly to named oversight, operational discipline, and a competency standard written so clearly it left no room for interpretation. The contract did not reward enthusiasm, it rewarded precision, consistency, and accountability assigned to a specific role I had built around myself. Corey called it flexibility. In meetings, he spoke about removing friction, streamlining approvals, and trusting instinct over process. He shortened reviews, skipped secondary checks, and merged reporting steps to save time. Each change sounded harmless on its own. Together, they rewired the structure that kept the revenue valid. Gordon praised the initiative, calling it adaptive leadership, the kind that moved companies forward. I didn't argue. Arguing would have suggested opinion. This wasn't opinion. It was architecture. Instead, I documented everything. I saved calendar invites, archived revisions, and captured timestamps where language shifted from controlled to casual. I let Corey speak for himself in writing. Every shortcut left a footprint. Every decision created a record. I stayed polite, helpful, and silent. The clarity was almost comforting. Once you recognize how systems fail, emotion becomes unnecessary. I stopped feeling overlooked and started feeling prepared. The deal could tolerate ambition. It could not tolerate deviation from its conditions. That distinction mattered more than anyone in leadership realized. The message arrived late in the afternoon, brief and carefully worded. The partner flagged a compliance concern, no accusation, no demands, just a request for confirmation that oversight conditions were still being met as agreed. I read it twice, then once more without reacting. The warning wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I forwarded the note, added no commentary, and waited. By then, my calm wasn't resignation, it was alignment. Conditional revenue doesn't collapse suddenly. It tightens, quietly, until someone notices the weight, and someone always does. I sat back, knowing the system would now speak louder than I ever could, because conditions, once ignored, do not forgive confidence, titles, or last names when pressure begins to rise. I was halfway through reviewing revised timelines when my phone rang. The caller ID showed internal legal, which immediately felt wrong. I hadn't escalated anything. I hadn't filed complaints or raised alarms. Still, I answered. The general counsel didn't waste time. What changed, she asked. No accusation, no defensiveness, just that. I paused. Not to soften the answer, but to organize it. Then I told her exactly what had changed. Authority had shifted. Oversight had been reassigned without revisiting the conditions tied to the revenue. Process steps had been compressed. Named accountability no longer matched the contract. She listened without interrupting. I could almost hear pages turning on her end. I kept my tone flat. Facts don't need decoration. Emotion only gives people something to argue with. When I finished, there was a brief silence, the kind that signals recognition rather than confusion. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something quietly. If you were in my place, would you have spoken sooner or waited for the system to respond on its own? You don't have to answer now, but hold that thought as this unfolds. The call ended politely, without reassurance. That was when the surprise settled in. I hadn't been contacted because I was a problem. I was being contacted because I was a reference point. Control returned in an unexpected way, not through authority, but through clarity. Less than an hour later, another call came in. This time, it wasn't internal. An external law firm, retained to review exposure tied to the deal, wanted to understand recent operational adjustments. The phrasing was careful. The implication wasn't. I answered the same way. I outlined the changes, the timelines, and who had approved them. I didn't speculate. I didn't defend myself. I simply described the structure as it now existed. When the call ended, I felt something settle into place. It wasn't relief. It was alignment. The questions were no longer coming from me. They were coming from the system itself. And systems don't argue. They only record, escalate, and wait. Without apology or hesitation, when the pressure started spreading, It didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as repetition, the same questions, asked by different voices, all circling the same uncomfortable point. Legal wanted clarity, finance wanted reassurance, compliance wanted to know who had approved what and when. It began with a quiet discovery. During a document review, legal found Gordon Hale's signature on a certification of substituted competency. It was meant to confirm that oversight responsibilities had been properly transferred. The problem wasn't the signature, it was the assumption behind it. Corey did not meet the conditions required by the agreement: experience thresholds, reporting independence, and named operational control were not suggestions. They were prerequisites. Phones rang more often after that. Meetings multiplied. I was pulled into calls that ended with the same question, phrased slightly differently each time. Any workaround? Could the structure be adjusted retroactively? Was there a way to preserve the revenue without reopening the agreement? I answered consistently. No loopholes, no cosmetic fixes. Conditional revenue doesn't bend because leadership feels confident. It either qualifies or it doesn't. Each answer narrowed the room, stripping away optimism and replacing it with math and language no one could charm. The realization spread unevenly. Some executives resisted it. Others grew quiet. Gordon pushed back, insisting intent should matter. Corey argued learning curves were normal. Neither argument appeared in the contract. Legal knew that. So did the partner. The notice arrived before anyone expected it. The strategic partner informed us they were temporarily suspending revenue recognition, pending confirmation that contractual conditions were being met. No threats, no accusations, just procedure. That was when the truth finally surfaced. The issue wasn't personal. It wasn't even managerial. It was structural. A signature had replaced competence, and the system had noticed. By the end of the day, the pressure had changed direction. It no longer pressed on me. It pressed outward, toward the decisions that created it, demanding explanations that confidence alone could not provide. That shift marked the moment accountability became unavoidable, visible, and irreversible for everyone who had dismissed structure as optional inside the company walls. I could feel the tension before Corey spoke, the kind that tightens a room without anyone raising their voice. It surfaced during a meeting that was supposed to be procedural, but Corey leaned forward and said my name out loud, sharp enough to cut. "This delay is on Ren," he said. "She designed the structure. She should have warned us it wouldn't adapt." I didn't interrupt. I watched Gordon's jaw set, the familiar look he wore when pressure challenged his authority. He didn't defend me, instead. He turned to legal and said, "We need this fixed, fast. Find a way through it." The word "through" carried weight. It suggested obstacles were optional, that rules existed to be persuaded. The tension escalated privately after that. Corey sent an internal email to senior leadership, copying compliance and finance. "Ren's rigidity is creating unnecessary exposure." It read, "Her failure to support operational flexibility is now putting revenue at risk." The language was polished, confident, and deeply careless. That email traveled farther than Corey intended. Legal flagged it within minutes. So did the partner, who requested a copy after noticing discrepancies in the explanation being offered. I read it again, slowly, noticing what it didn't say. There was no acknowledgement of contractual limits, no reference to named qualifications. Just blame, confidently assigned downward. Gordon doubled down. He called legal again and said, "I signed off. That should be enough." The reply was measured. "Intent doesn't override conditions." They told him. Silence followed. By then, the confrontation was no longer personal. It was documented. That email, meant to pressure me into compliance, had done the opposite. It established awareness. It confirmed leadership knew conditions existed and chose to override them anyway. The shift was immediate. Questions stopped circling me and started pointing upward. Corey's accusation became evidence. Gordon's insistence became a timeline. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed shape. By the end of the day, I understood something clearly. When leaders push back against structure in writing, they don't weaken it, they expose themselves. And once that happens, confrontation no longer needs voices. The record speaks with more force than any meeting ever could. I wasn't invited to the board meeting at first. That alone told me something had shifted. Then a calendar update arrived, brief and formal, requesting my presence as a subject matter expert on revenue controls. Not an employee, not a witness, an expert. The room felt different from executive meetings. Fewer smiles, fewer assumptions. The board chair opened without ceremony. "We want facts," she said. "Walk us through the structure." I did exactly that. I explained how the 18 million was built, why conditions existed, and where accountability had been reassigned without authorization. I didn't speculate. I didn't assign blame. I described the system as it was designed. And as it had been altered, Gordon tried to interrupt. "That's not the full picture," he said. The chair raised a hand. "You'll have time," she replied. He didn't get it back easily. Each time he spoke, he drifted into intention, trust, family. Each time I responded, I returned to language, signatures, and sequence. Logic doesn't argue, it accumulates. There was a moment of quiet satisfaction I didn't show. Not pride, relief. The truth no longer needed me to defend it. It was standing on its own. Questions followed, precise and uncomfortable. Who approved this change? Who certified competency? When did the partner raise concerns? Gordon answered fewer of them as the meeting went on. Control slipped in small, visible ways. The final question landed softly. What is the potential personal exposure tied to these decisions? No one looked at me. They all looked at Gordon. That was the shift. The conversation was no longer about fixing revenue. It was about responsibility, named and individual, and the room finally stopped smiling. In that silence, I realized my role had changed permanently, from builder to reference point, while the board measured consequences with calm precision. Already moving past denial toward decisions Gordon could no longer control. And the outcome felt inevitable to everyone. When the numbers flipped, they did it quietly. $18 million stopped being celebrated and started being examined. Line by line, clause by clause. Legal no longer called it revenue. They called it exposure. Risk committees reviewed assumptions that had once been applauded. And suddenly, every shortcut Corey had taken carried weight. The insurance review came next. Directors' and officers' coverage was assessed against decision logs and certifications. Certain actions, taken knowingly outside defined conditions, were excluded. Protection narrowed. Emails were forwarded. Silence stretched. Cold justice doesn't announce itself. It calculates. Corey was removed without ceremony. No speech. No explanation. His access was revoked. His calendar cleared. His authority reassigned to interim oversight that looked nothing like ambition. He didn't protest publicly. By then, the system had already spoken for him. I watched the collapse move outward. Finance froze projections. Partners paused coordination. Compliance requested confirmations that could no longer be given easily. The 18 million was still there on paper, but it had transformed into a liability no one wanted attached to their name. Then the call came that ended the illusion. Gordon was instructed to take administrative leave pending further review. Not asked. Instructed. The phrasing mattered. Leadership change protocols were triggered. Board counsel stepped in. Control transferred. There was no celebration in it for me, just a sense of alignment returning to the structure. The consequences were proportional, impersonal, and precise. Revenue had revealed its true nature, not as a reward, but as a responsibility that could not survive substitution. As the day closed, I understood something fundamental. Systems don't collapse in chaos. They correct, and when they do, everyone involved learns the same lesson, whether they want to or not. The realization settled slowly, heavy but undeniable. As calendars emptied, authority shifted, and the company adjusted without drama, proving that structure, not ego, ultimately decides who remains standing when numbers stop behaving politely under real pressure. The call came late, after the building had gone quiet. I almost didn't answer, but the name on the screen told me this wasn't something that would wait. Gordon's voice sounded different the moment he spoke. Lower, slower, stripped of the certainty that used to fill every sentence. He didn't apologize. That absence mattered. Instead, he said, "We need your help, not guidance, not advice. Help!" The word landed cleanly, without drama. I listened without interrupting, letting him explain the situation as if I hadn't already watched it unfold from the inside. Revenue stalled, oversight questioned, pressure from the board growing heavier by the hour. When he finished, I spoke carefully. I told him I was willing to help, but only under conditions that should have existed from the beginning: full transparency, clear authority, oversight assigned to people who met the requirements, not people who shared a last name. No shortcuts, no reinterpretations. Silence followed, longer this time. I could hear him considering the cost of agreeing. Control has weight, and letting go of it feels like loss, he finally said. Do what you need to do. That was the moment the tension released. Not because I had won, but because the system had finally been acknowledged. I didn't return to my old role. I made that clear. I wasn't interested in being positioned beneath decisions I didn't make. If I came back, it would be as an independent authority, with scope defined by the contract, not by convenience. Gordon accepted that too. Quietly, when the call ended. There was no satisfaction, just calm. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it settles when resistance stops. I understood then that my leverage had never been emotional. It had been structural, waiting patiently for recognition. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet, aware that the next phase would move forward without raised voices or rushed fixes. The tone had changed because the truth no longer needed defending. It was finally in charge, and for the first time, the direction ahead felt stable, deliberate, and no longer negotiable to everyone. I watched the resolution arrive without spectacle. Corey's departure was announced in a short internal notice, stripped of titles and explanations. No farewell meeting followed. His name simply vanished from systems he never fully understood. The project moved on without him, steadier for the absence. Gordon's exit came differently. The board framed it as a transition, but no one mistook the meaning. Authority changed hands, signatures rerouted, and decisions slowed just enough to regain precision. For the first time in months, meetings ended with clarity instead of optimism. The revenue was stabilized under proper oversight. Conditions were reaffirmed, controls restored, and the partner resumed recognition without fanfare. The 18 million survived because it was finally treated as responsibility, not reward. What nearly broke the company wasn't ambition. It was the belief that competence could be inherited. I didn't return as an employee. That chapter closed cleanly, instead. I stepped in as an independent advisor, bound by contract, scope, and accountability. I spoke when structure required it and stayed silent when it didn't. The work felt lighter that way. Honest. There was satisfaction in watching order return, but no gloating. Justice doesn't need celebration. It needs alignment. People were held accountable according to their actions, not their intentions or bloodlines. The system corrected itself, exactly as it was designed to do. As I closed my final report, the lesson felt simple and complete. $18 million didn't destroy them. Treating competence like inheritance did. That truth remained undeniable long after calls. I didn't walk away from this story feeling victorious. I walked away feeling clearer. What this experience taught me isn't about revenge or clever timing. It's about how quietly systems record truth while people argue over appearances. You can work hard, stay ethical, and still be sidelined, but if your work is built correctly, it keeps speaking long after you're asked to stay quiet. The real lesson is this: competence doesn't need to shout, and it doesn't need protection through favoritism. It needs structure. When you tie your value to clear standards, documented decisions, and real accountability. You stop depending on personalities to be fair. That's not just a business lesson, it's a way to protect your dignity, emotionally. The hardest part wasn't being replaced. It was watching responsibility treated like a family heirloom instead of a duty. Letting go of that anger was freeing. Once I did, I could stand still and let the truth move on its own. And it always does. If you're listening right now, I'm curious, where are you listening from? At home, in the car, late at night, or early in the morning? Share it in the comments. And if this story stirred something familiar, tell me what part stayed with you the most. If you found value here, please like the video and share it with someone who might need it. And if you subscribe, you'll keep getting stories like this, stories about quiet strength, real boundaries, and justice that doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes, that's exactly what we need to hear.